and I'm one of the event hosts here at the store. Thank you all so much for being here as we celebrate the release of Amy Rossi's debut novel, The Cover Girl. Before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping notes. First of all, please keep your phones on silent during the event. And if you need to pick up a pre-ordered copy of The Cover Girl, or if you'd like to purchase copies, you can do so at the end of the event at the register behind our event space. Our moderator tonight is Maura Johnston, a music and culture writer and editor whose work has been published in the Boston Globe, Entertainment Weekly, Time, and Rolling Stone. She's a member of Boston College's journalism faculty, where she teaches writing about popular music and journalism and new media. She was a founding editor of the music blog Idolator and serves as the music editor at Village Voice. Amy Rossi received her MFA from Louisiana State University, and she lives in North Carolina by way of Massachusetts with her partner and 2 dogs. The Cover Girl is her first novel, and she's been working on the book since 2014 while she was an MFA student, where it began as a short story. 2 years after the Me Too movement, the story had grown into a novel centering a young woman's reclamation of power. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the book, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So, Birdie Rhodes was only 13 when legendary modeling agent Harriet Goldman discovered her in a department store and transformed her into one of Harriet's girls. What followed felt like something incredible, a chance for shy Birdie to express herself in front of a camera. But 2 years later, she meets a 31-year-old rock star, and her teenage heart falls hard as he leads her into a new life, despite Harriet's warnings. Then, as abruptly as it began, it's over, like a lipstick-smeared fever dream. Birdie tries hard to forget her time over in Paris, in the dying embers of the LA punk scene, in Boston at the heights of the AIDS crisis. She's not that person anymore. At least that's what she's been telling herself. Decades later, Birdie lives a quiet life. She works modest gigs, takes Pilates classes, and mostly keeps to herself. Maybe it's not the glamour she once envisioned, but it's peaceful and comfortable. Then a letter arrives inviting Birdie to celebrate Harriet's 50th year career. Except Birdie hasn't spoken to her in nearly 30 years, with good reason. Almost famous, almost destroyed, Birdie can only make her own future if she reckons with her past fame, the trauma, the opportunities she gave up for a man who brought her into a life she wasn't ready for, just like she's not ready now. But the painful truth waits for nobody, not even Birdie Rhodes. This striking debut novel explores the dizzying fallout of being seen and not heard in a high-stakes industry that leaves no silhouette unscathed. Please help me in welcoming Amy Rossi and Maura Johnston.
Hello. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Maura.
Are you going to start by reading the book?
Yes, I am. Thank you for that introduction, Haley, and thank you all so much for coming out tonight. This means the world to me. This bookstore is very important to me. It is a foundational part of who I am as a writer. I would not be writing today, I don't think, without this bookstore. The books that I found here made me a writer, and which made me leave, but I'm so glad to be back, and I'm so glad to be sharing this night with you all. Thank you again, and thank you to the books. I'm going to read a short passage about Harriet's girls. The invitation still sits on the countertop. Harriet's girls. I haven't been called one of those in years. This is from 2018, by the way. The legend is this. A young woman answers phones at a famous modeling agency. The famous modeling agency. Eventually, she's one of the ones booking jobs and negotiating rates. She sees careers bloom and fall, sees the 4 seasons of a girl's potential unfold in a week. She sees the distinction between fashion and commercial and what pays what. She sees an assumption that girls will eventually get married and have babies, so who needs longevity? And she sees 1968 on the calendar and knows the times, they are a-changin'. She sees everything and is invisible to everyone. She sees a girl leave the agent's office in tears after being told the usual things to boil down to no. Too heavy, too plain, too boring, too much in any direction, and also not enough. But this one is different. The young woman sees what the agent cannot. She knows about a job. She has earned trust. She has connections. The girl books the job, and then, practically overnight, Vogue. She becomes a star. The young woman is fired and lands on her feet at a smaller agency where the founder is tired of competing with the big famous one, and so lets the young woman take the reins. Scout's scout, an agent's agent, and booker's book, except when the young woman sees true potential and decides a girl is worth taking a more active role for. No need to wait for someone to come to your doorstep when she could be walking down the street. Find them early and build a career. Find them early and help them make some money. Tell the story about Grace Kelly's origins at every chance. Find them early before the big agency does. Find them early, and they will always be her girls. Maybe that last part isn't true. How much of the rest is? Does it matter? I didn't realize we were a thing, that I was part of such a thing, until months after I started modeling. As in, oh, you're one of Harriet's girls, said in a way where the capital letters are just as pronounced as the words themselves. The implication varied, as it does for women who have never felt the need to shut themselves up or shrink themselves down. But whatever the impressions of Harriet, it could be counted on that we, the girls, were as quiet and as small as needed. Her voice was enough. I would walk down the halls of Harriet's office with the photos of the most famous of her girls, the original ones, watching me. And here is how foolish I was. I didn't think of them as my peers. I gave them names like I would have given dolls: Mindy, Rhiannon, Juliet. They weren't so much who I wanted to be as who I imagined watching over me. If I was coming back from a particularly good go-see, it was as if they were signaling their approval in their cocked eyebrows, saucy half-smiles. And if it had been a bad shoot, a bad meeting, their expressions would shift into something stern. Do better, Bertie. We expect more. Harriet herself would seldom be so direct. My own mother wouldn't have been able to offer an opinion that held weight with me at the time. Perhaps it sounds sad then that I leaned on photographs, not even the actual women, for some sort of instruction. Perhaps I should look back and think, of course things unfolded how they did. What other way could they have gone? But even now, years and years later, what I think is, how resourceful. My photo eventually became one line in the hallway. For a couple of years, I could at least look to myself for some sort of reassurance.
Thank you. So, I know that in your introduction, it mentioned that you started as a short story. So, was that passage? What? Because the thing about this book is that, it weaves through multiple eras. So, there are parts in 2018, there are parts in the 70s, 80s, 90s. What era did the character, which character came to mind first?
Bertie as a teenager came to me first. But the story always ended with Bertie as an adult. But it was fairly linear.
Yeah. What about Bertie as a teenager sort of captivated you initially? What was the sort of spark that led you to write what would become this very fleshed out, very vibrant, very interesting, vibrant on the page, but very sort of quiet in her day-to-day character?
Well, it started with Behind the Music, as all good things do, right?
Gets a shout out in the book too.
Yes. Being a teenager at the turn of the millennium, I think I was fed a lot of nostalgia programming. And I remember watching an episode of Behind the Music as a teen and hearing about a rock star who became the guardian of his teenage girlfriend so he could bring her on the road with him. And I remember thinking, well, that just seems like something we should talk about all the time. That is weird. And I held on to that and kind of always, even as a teen, thought like, I will revisit this one day because I want to tell this story. And then one day, when I was in grad school this summer, I was starting to work on a short story, and I was like really hitting, like, ooh, I don't know what I'm gonna write about. And then somehow that came to me, and I was like, oh, I think because I've been doing a lot of like research on hair metal groupies for a novel I was working on at the time, and so that kind of brought me back to the baby groupie era, air quotes necessary, and thinking about like this thing that I've been cogitating on for so long, and and then Bertie just kind of emerged, and her voice kind of just drove the bus.
Yeah, her voice is so singular because it is like, there's a lot of stuff happening around her, but it seems like sometimes she doesn't believe it. And I feel like, through the book, one of the refrains is all I had to be with legs. And I feel like that is such an evocative line. Can you talk? Because also, I mean, I will say, it also reminds me of Don Henley's All She Wants to Do Is Dance. And he obviously had his own problems with this kind of issue. So like, how did that sort of refrain come to you when you were writing?
It fit the scene. In the story, she had wrapped a Nair commercial. Her relationship with Nair is much more complicated in the book.
Very complicated.
And it felt like something I just kept returning to because it meant different things at different points.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it was a good thing, it was freeing. Nobody needed anything else from her. All she had to be was legs, but other times it was really limiting. And so it was very useful as a kind of guidepost as to where she was at that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there any sort of inspirations for Birdie as you sort of grew with the character and got to know her better through, writing her out?
I think I drew from a lot of research. She's not based on anybody in particular, but girls like Laurie Maddox and Sable Starr, who were hanging out on the Sunset Strip when they were 13 and 14 and 15 in the early 70s, hanging out with rock stars, they were definitely an inspiration. The career of Brooke Shields, who is Birdie's nemesis in the book, but they really dealt with similar things. Brooke Shields definitely, and then Priscilla Presley, of course. There unfortunately were no shortage of young women's stories to turn to.
Well, I was actually wondering, related to that, the rock press does come into play in the book, and especially Circus Magazine has a kind of pivotal role. When you were researching this, what was the coverage of these women like, if there was any, in the press at the time?
There wasn't a lot. It was kind of the birth of the paparazzi era.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like, I remember hearing about maybe the first picture of Jimmy Page with Laurie Maddox, and like it kind of didn't cross the pond to his wife, but it was, you could kind of get away with it because there weren't cameras everywhere and there weren't people recording your every move, and people were famous enough that they just kind of, turned a blind eye.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how the celebrity press, the gossip press, whatever you want to call it, has really turned into this that would never happen now. Something happening in Los Angeles would be immediately transmitted back to London or whatever part of England his wife lived in. And so when you were thinking about, the book and like the sort of relationship that Birdie had with the public, what sort of guideposts did you use to look at how the celebrity press, I should say, D/evolved, since, it's kind of done both?
I feel like there was like a certain moment where you could like be a person doing a thing in the public eye and like manage not to be a Wikipedia entry.
Yeah.
And there's a sweet spot, and like Birdie hit that sweet spot. And this is going to be a really weird inspiration analog. I'm not quite sure what the word is, but I had this blog in like 2015ish where I would do these like tongue-in-cheek analyses of hair metal videos, and I did one on the band Cinderella. I did a couple on the band Cinderella. And so if you searched for like the girl in the Cinderella video, because people really want to know who the girl in Nobody's Fool is, if you just search for her, I created the GIFs that pop up most often, so my name is linked to her. And people email me and they ask me like, are you the girl from the Cinderella video? And I'm like, well, I was like 3, so no, but thank you. And so I think about that kind of thing a lot, where like, here's somebody who was like kind of public, and like, that's about the level of fame that Birdie reaches. She's in some magazines, but like nothing with her name attached. She's mostly like catalog ads, she's not editorial. And so that kind of like, you're in the public eye, but not quite. And so people might have a lot of questions about you, but it's much harder to find.
Yeah. I also think that Birdie's, there are some really great lines sprinkled throughout the 2018 part about aging and being a woman in the public eye, and certainly somebody who, her career was based on her. I mean, I don't think it's, diminishing to say that her career was based on her looks. And like, I feel like that those lines and like the sort of just casually cutting way that you describe, you know, the ways in which women have to navigate, especially women who were in the public eye in some sense. Can you talk a little bit about like, you know, how you, like, you know, your experiences, like not your experiences, but like how you decided to bring those, you know, really kind of just dawning observations into the book?
I think that also has to do with sort of my interest in pop culture that predates me, and just like the way women and men too are treated, like for getting old,
Yeah.
like for having the temerity to like look their age, and how unfair that is, and how people expect you to look how they remember you. But and it's really difficult for Birdie too, because like she's gone through a lot. She has survived a lot. She's seen a lot of people die, and so she knows like the fact that she's 56 years old and like is out there, like is like she can't be ashamed of that, because like it meant she's still here. But she knows what people expect her to look like, even if she was never famous. She still has like her old ads, she has her old portfolio, and I just felt like, especially because her youth made her so special as a teenager. She gets her start very young. Her youth is what attracts the rock star to her. That youth was so like important. So I felt like it was really important for her to have like a complicated relationship with her age and plastic surgery as
Yeah.
well, because she's not against it. The book is not against it, but she has a difficult relationship with what she's willing to do and why.
And I also think that that relates to her activism, the activism that sort of comes into play with her HIV awareness and health of people who are, you know, dealing with the disease. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I felt like it was important for her to step outside of herself. For so much of her life, it's about her, it's about the rock star, it's about her career. And then because she's in the fashion world in the 80s, AIDS has a seismic impact on people she cares about and people she loves, and that kind of jars her into doing something else with her life, and thinking about her life differently and focusing outward instead of inward. And it was important for me to include that because I have a personal connection to that. My uncle passed away 25 years ago, and he was fortunate to like benefit from newer drugs and a very supportive family. But his name is actually Bobby. There's a Bobby in the book, who is a great uncle. So it was great to bring him in there. And I felt like that was a way to honor his impact on my life and his importance to me.
Yeah, that's also, I should note that that's when she moves back to Boston.
Yes.
Too, so she's very, like, it's very Boston-centric on her. Yeah, Birdie is such a fascinating character. You know, she's somebody who I think doesn't realize the effects of her beauty until very later, when she's like, oh, I need to kind of get this, I need to figure out how to navigate this world now that I don't have this anymore. And one person that she has, the one person that she has like kind of the closest relationship with is Harriet, who is her maternal figure, since, you know, her mother is kind of very cold, and I wanted to ask you sort of your inspirations for the Harriet character.
This is gonna be just the worst answer in the entire
No, it's
book.
okay, it's fine.
When I picture Harriet, I picture Fran Drescher's character from This Is Spinal Tap.
Yeah, that totally makes
And
sense,
like,
yeah.
that is who I was channeling the entire time.
Yeah.
And she was so much fun to write. Like, just kept putting them in restaurants, because writing Harriet ordering food was, and you need a break in a book like this. You need like a little relief. And that was just so much fun to write. And she, you know, she wasn't a big part of the short story.
I was gonna ask that, yeah.
She's barely in there. She gets discovered, but it's not like a whole big thing. And I think what I wanted the central relationship for this book to be Birdie and Harriet, not Birdie and the rock star, because I felt like that book had been written.
Yeah.
And so even though he's a big part, and like Harriet's in and out of her life, like I really wanted that to be like the inciting incident and the thing that is driving everything, because I feel like the relationship between those two women are like the most important part.
Yeah, and it drives the whole narrative, right? Where it's like they had this falling out, and then will she go and reconcile? But the rock star is also an interesting character because he does not have a name. Everybody else in the book has a name. The guitarist, there's the doctor, there are all these people. The rock star. What was behind your decision to not name him?
At first, it was practical. I couldn't think of a name that fit. And then I kind of felt limited because it had to be like a believable rock star name.
Yeah.
But then I also didn't want it to like hew too closely to anybody who might have been inspiration. Trying to avoid, a legal situation.
Of course. Very, very practical.
But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this guy doesn't need a name. Like, his name is gonna survive. Like, men like him don't need airtime.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's interesting because it is like that, the way that he's written throughout the book, like he's somebody who also, similar to Birdie, has this part of his identity that's very public, and he doesn't know, he's struggling, particularly with Birdie, how to reconcile being an actual person. And they live in this house in Malibu where the windows are floor to ceiling and no shades or curtains. So it's like they're always on display, and it's like the public persona of both people. But Birdie has more of a sort of self-realized place, where the rock star, especially when he gets into his unfortunate hair metal phase, which I love that you wrote that because that's so typical. Like, I listen to a lot of classic American top 40 when I'm like getting ready for my day, and there's always like every 80s episode has like the guy from the 70s who's like trying on synths or whatever, and then obviously it goes from there to trying on hairspray and spandex. But I think it's interesting too because it's like it speaks to how the relationship that Birdie and him had was very immature and very kind of fantastic, fantastic in a fantasy way, not fantastic in an awesome way, but because it was this kind of ideal where she was living what people might have thought was the dream. And I think that having him be this sort of like almost mythical figure was a really smart decision, and it really helped make the book like more of a redemption story for Birdie. You're welcome. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that my mind just went completely
No, it's
blank.
okay. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, that all sounded really wonderful and like.
No, it's true. I mean, like you really do get the kind of like you said, behind the music. He is like the kind of behind the music archetype where you're like, it's all going great, and then he drives into a tree, and it's just that tree is gnarled around him for the rest of his life, and there's no driving in. There's driving into a cornfield, not a tree in this book.
The tree is a 15-year-old girl,
Yeah.
basically.
And I think that it's really it's really fascinating because I think that one thing that we're dealing with right now in culture in general is this kind of, and Me Too is part of it, fame and glamour have always been kind of this ideal in American culture. And I think that because of a lot of factors, because of the panoptic society that we live in, because of things like TMZ, because of reality TV, because of just, people having to feeling like they have to be on all the time, you're seeing a lot more of the mask slip from what's purportedly glamorous. And I think that this book really kind of demystifies something that was glamorized as recently as 2000 with Almost Famous.
Mm-hmm.
And that still is in a lesser extent kind of glamorous. Because when I was thinking about this book, I was thinking about how, I don't know if any of you remember the Cobra Snake from the 2000s, popular party blog, and it had Corey Kennedy, who was like the 14-year-old girl who was running around all these parties in Los Angeles. And it is this kind of like the fetishization of youth and carefreeness is, I think, still present in culture, although it's not as, I don't know if any parents are signing people over to like people on Warped Tour or anything.
Well, there was Courtney Stodden.
Courtney Stodden, yes, that's
and
true.
I remember that, and everybody was like, this is horrible. Let's report on it constantly.
Yeah.
But like, who's doing something about it?
Right, and now, like, so Courtney Stodden was 16 when she married this 51-year-old guy, and she got a lot of plastic surgery, and she was on, TMZ a lot and everything, and they've since gotten divorced, I think, and she's, talked about her relationships. How have the first person accounts of the women who are like Birdie, how did they inform your book?
I think those are really interesting to read. Laurie Maddox published this essay in Thrillist in 2015 before David Bowie passed away about her relationship with David Bowie when she was 14 or 15, and it resurged after his passing away. And she waxes very poetic about it. And I've seen her talk to Pamela DeBar about groupie days, and she's waxed nostalgic about it and just been like, no, this is great. I was different. But as the Me Too movement took root and continued, it's been really interesting to watch her kind of reevaluate that. I'm okay, maybe I was okay, but I wouldn't want this for somebody else's kid. And I wouldn't want this for another 14-year-old.
Yeah.
And just I think that's also a question that really kind of drove me with this book, which was what do you do when what you believe was the good part of your life was wrong? And everybody is telling you or trying to tell you as an adult that this was wrong.
Yeah.
And you absolutely cannot hear it because what does that mean? Who are you then?
Yeah, and watching Birdie sort of piece together the reactions from people in her life, they're kind of low-key horrified to be just straight up saying what that guy did to you. Watching that kind of come into focus is, I think, a really compelling part, especially the latter half of the book, because the first part, there definitely is that sort of patina of the, I don't know, sun-kissed Malibu dream of, and then as the scales fall from her eyes, I guess, she can see what's going on, and it's really very, it's almost haunting, I would say, but it is at the end, it is very sort of you're rooting for her. She's very rootable, she's somebody who was in this position that's very lionized by certain, especially not now as much, but even now maybe a little bit with the nostalgia thing. And you can see her kind of rising up against that and rising up against the expectations of everybody who might have seen her in the back of that one photo in Circus magazine. Can you talk a little bit about the other books the other texts that you used in your research?
Yes. I read a lot of model memoirs. Brooke Shields, There Was a Little Girl, which is about her time as a child actress and model, and her relationship with her mother, who, again, was what is she doing? Why is she in Pretty Baby? But also, if you see her in interviews, from those times, people are asking her horrible questions. And then Beverly Johnson's The Face That Changed It All is also a great one. She was the first black model on the cover of Vogue in 1974. And she went through some stuff, but her voice is hilarious in that book. Just talking to a friend. I also read Michael Gross's Model, The Ugly Side of a Beautiful Industry, I believe. He goes really deep into the history of modeling. I also read this very interesting yet sometimes unsettling book about 70s rock tours. It was called What You Want Is in the Limo, and it was about following Led Zeppelin, The Who, and Alice Cooper on tour in 1973. And I remember reading this book, trying to it was great research, right? The ins and outs of a rock tour. But the writer is talking about, he doesn't talk about groupies very much, which is a little bit of a, what's going on there? But he said there was a line about, what is a 27-year-old rock star? What is a 27-year-old Englishman interesting to a high school sophomore?
Yeah.
And I was like, shouldn't we be asking why the 27-year-old Englishman is interested in the high school sophomore?
Yeah.
So that was, I remember highlighting that passage and being like, huh, okay.
Yeah, and the way that he talks about, the rock star talks about her is very kind of like just putting her on a pedestal, you know, and just like, he says, I love you a lot, but it's very kind of like, I love the vision of you that I first saw at the open call.
Mm-hmm. That's the
Yeah.
fixed point in time.
The fixed point in time, and when she became more of a person, he was like, I gotta bounce
Yeah.
to Europe for a tour
You
with
can't
3
come.
itineraries, and you can't come.
Don't know where I am.
How did you kind of navigate writing the multiple timelines?
So I had 2 documents.
Yeah.
And one was the present day timeline, and I wrote that kind of linearly. And then I had my past timeline, and I wrote that linearly. And never the twain should meet until the very end, because I didn't want it to be one of those dual timeline books where the present day is only in response to the past. I wanted it to exist as its own thing and like try to write it on its own merits as opposed to like only regarding what happened. And it was really like, you can leave yourself breadcrumbs without even thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
It was funny the way things would kind of connect, and I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what I need here. I'm a big, the only way out is through kind of writer, and so sometimes I would like skip ahead and jump around from document to document trying to figure out what I needed, and
Mhm.
that's, yeah, I only put it together when I sent it to my agent.
Nice. I mean, it works, so. What, when you were thinking of concerts that the rock star played, what, and the festivals too, which were their own special hell, which, yes. But what kind of arena spectacles did you have in mind when you were like coming up with the sorts of shows that he would play?
I was just like picturing footage from like outdoor, like huge arenas, and because he was like when this starts, he's like at the top of his game.
Yeah.
So I was like picturing like, you know, just like a big Aerosmith concert. Not saying it's Aerosmith, or like just
No, it's a solo. I'm gonna ask about that.
just like really popular, really filled, like just like but not big, but like he's hitting everywhere, right? Because that was also the reality of the day. You're like going to like all these small towns, anything that has an arena or a civic center, like you're hitting them all because that's how you're making your money. So he was just like selling out civic centers all over the Midwest and up and down the East Coast and all that.
Mhm. And you do make him like, because you know, obviously the kind of rock ideal is the band, guitar, bass, drums, vocals. But in this case, there is guitar, bass, drums, vocals, but the vocalist is the frontman is the star, which I thought was an interesting choice because I feel like that was rarer. Because MTV really kicked off lead singer syndrome, and then everybody started going solo. Steve Perry, David Lee Roth, they were like, oh God. But I wanted to kind of, was that sort of a character decision for you?
I thought it would be, he didn't seem to me somebody who answered to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure their history is littered with bands where the lead singer thought that too. But I really liked the idea of him like kind of flying solo. Also, like, he only has the doctor, right? Which is, you know, very Elvis of him. That's his manager. But if he had like an active band who he had to make decisions with, that might be people who would be like, hey, maybe don't adopt a 15-year-old girlfriend. That
Yeah.
sounds horrible. So he also only surrounded himself with people who were going to tell him yes.
Did you research those types of arrangements? And how common were they?
I found at least 2 that were said to be like legally documented.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I would just like be listening to something and come across like Bo Derek was in a similar situation. And of course Priscilla Presley like was in, like, he didn't become her guardian, but he moved her from Europe at age 14 to live in his mansion for 5 years till he married her. So it wasn't like an everyday occurrence, I guess, but it was just the fact that there was any, and the fact that there was more than one is just like, oh, wow, okay,
Yeah.
this is where we were as people.
Yeah, but then you see I don't want to give it away, but you see kind of the illusion shattered in a way that like reframes her relationship with her family. And I wanted to, maybe think about like how the difference kind of between chosen family and biological family, and how those decisions shift over time and become like different based on your perspective of where you are, how old you are, and everything.
Yeah, it takes her a while to find her family and to admit that she has a family.
Yeah.
Because her biological family is very cold, very like, not, they're just kind of utilitarian, I guess. Like, they didn't expect her to come along, and then she did, and nothing changed. So she didn't grow up in like a warm and loving household, and then, but I also have like a little sympathy for her mother, who like didn't plan to become a mother and did.
Yeah.
And didn't really know what she was doing, at a time when there wasn't a whole lot of help with that.
Mhm.
But she does eventually find her family, and then it's basically people forcing themselves on her and not letting go, because she kind of pushes away everybody who knew her when she was with the rock star.
Yeah. What are some other novels about this kind, like the music world that you enjoy and that you have enjoyed over the years, even like when you were younger?
I think the final revival of Opal and Nev is probably my favorite novel that takes place in the music world. If you haven't read it, it's that. It's a dual timeline book. It's also just like very inspiring to me because it came out apparently like at the same time as Daisy Jones and the Six, and it's also an oral history about a band. And it was just like that big lesson of like, okay, somebody's always gonna do it, so like just do it as hard as you can, and like you'll still be able to like make it happen. Did I write a book about a woman adjacent to music who had red hair and was named Daisy? Yes, I did. Did need that boost of like, just keep going. But it's about a music journalist who, her father was in a band with this singer Opal, and in the 70s, and she's like trying to like uncover the truth of like Opal and Nev, who was like her songwriting partner. I'm not describing it very well, but it's like about like race and social justice and making music in the 70s and art, and just like it follows Opal and Nev over a period of time, and there's like the journalist like trying to dig through the truth of their relationship and like why they broke up, and like what the revival in the present day is going to look like. It's so good. It's by Donnie Walton.
Donnie Walton.
Also really love Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm. It's a more recent book by Laura Warrell, who I believe was a Boston connection, and parts of that book take place in Boston, and that's about a jazz musician and just like the women he leaves in his wake, and it's just so good.
Yeah. What about nonfiction books?
Nonfiction music books, oh man, when I was younger, I was just like such a Chad Klosterman head. Killing Yourself to Live, just like,
Yeah.
that one was like it for me. I must have read that book like a million times, which is weird because you would think Fargo Rock City would have been it, but Killing Yourself to Live was like my seminal music writing text.
I think the thing about Fargo Rock City too, because Amy and I, we first bonded over our shared love of the hard rock of the late 80s and early 90s. Fargo Rock City has opinions, and I think that for me it was a very frustrating read because I was like, you're wrong about every band that you think is good, and you're totally overlooking LA Guns and Faster Pussycat. What are you doing?
Oh my God.
So yeah, so like I think that might, I don't know if that but maybe for you that that might have been something to play.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
I am working on a book that may or may not take place on the Sunset Strip in the
Nice.
80s, but also Silicon Valley in the 90s, and somewhat inspired by The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2. So it's about
Great movie.
making art as a woman and being on the sidelines of somebody else's story and how pop culture shapes us, and a lot of similar themes. Like I kind of have my place I'm most comfortable, but a very different take on it, and it's due in 2.5 months, so that's fun for me.
Oh, wow. All right, well, we better get to some questions then. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Amy?
Sorry, yes, first.
Hi. Dying to know in the context of all this, and of course I happen to know you're a big sports fan, what your opinion of, how would both of you contextualize Bill Belichick, Jordan Hudson?
Dude, I live in North Carolina now. The hype will
Sorry about what happened on Saturday.
I'm not.
Well, it's kind of similar, right? I mean, well, it was funny because I don't know if you saw that there was that headline today that was like, David Byrne marrying woman 17 years younger than her, and then somebody's like, oh man, he snatched that 55-year-old right out of the cradle. And I thought that was a funny thing to see. But yeah, the Belichick Jordan thing, I don't know.
I mean, it's almost come back around so hard where I've seen people calling it like elder abuse.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. It's not going to end well. None of it.
No,
Not for
I
UNC,
think
not
that's
for-
the one thing you can definitely say about it. It's not going to end well.
Not going to end well.
Thoughts on LA Guns and Faster Pussy?
Both really underrated.
Totally.
I was wondering if you could speak a little more about some of the other people in the fashion world that Birdie encounters. Like, I was really captivated by some of the designers and photographers that she works with along the way.
Yes. So I will never do this again, but leading up to the release of this book, 10 weeks leading up to the release of this book, I did this thing on Instagram where I like deep dove into like all these models who she was adjacent to. But that also, yeah, I learned a lot about like photographers like Helmut Newton and Richard Avedon and all sorts of 70s designers like Halston, and their names are all escaping me right now. This is my second event, y'all, so if I seem like I'm doing a terrible job, that is why. But she ends up becoming very good friends with this designer named Azrian Depopa, and like, gosh, naming designers was so much fun too. Like, again, like you're writing a serious book, you need to like make your fun where you can have it, and I think there was a Kitty Wyoming, and like somebody's name is Kiki, and she wears Converse, even though she's a shoe designer. I had a lot of fun.
And she was not nice.
She was not nice. She designed these horrible shoes that she did not even have the fortitude to stand in. But Azreen is the most central figure that becomes not mentor, but like he's kind of there throughout Birdie's journey as a model and kind of punctuates her journey along the way. And I learned a lot through my research, and then like even deeper, so I could talk about this a lot more eloquently than I am right now, about like models who had those relationships with designers like Pat Cleveland and Stephen Burrows. Stephen Burrows also is in this book like more times than like maybe is necessary, because the 1973 Battle of Versailles, which is like this incredible fashion show, it was like America's first like big public debut against like French designers in 1973, and it was just like, there's very little surviving footage, but what is there is just gorgeous. And it was like all these really young American designers like going with these like models across to like raise money to like restore Versailles, and like there was this big spectacle of the French designers, and like the Americans like came out and just like kind of worked, and it was great. And that was also a huge inspiration, and I kind of worked that into any angle I possibly could in this book, because it was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, even though it was like a 45-second snippet. Really great documentary about it on Tubi called Versailles 73, American Runway Revolution. And
So, I know you said you wrote this relatively linearly, and I guess I'm just wondering, like, did you kind of know where it was going the whole time, or did your characters ever do anything that really surprised you?
both are true. I kind of knew what the last line was going to be fairly early, and I stayed open to surprises along the way. And I think one of the things that really emerged was this idea of Birdie's found family and her long distance friendships, and she didn't really have a lot of friends or like anybody in her life, like when I first started writing. And I think that would have been a much lonelier and more miserable, difficult novel. And I was really glad to like stay open to what that would look like, and really excited to see these like friends emerge for her. One of them, this is my agent tried to get me to cut. She didn't say it like that, but I knew that's what she meant. She was kind of like, you don't need Bobby because he only appeared in the past, and she was just like, you need to move through this section more quickly, and instead I just decided to double down and write Bobby harder, and I think that worked out for the best. Any other questions?
I have one.
Yes.
If you were to make a playlist for your readers, what would be on it?
Oh my goodness, there is a playlist on Spotify. It has a lot of different things. It has all the horrifying music about teenage girls from the 1970s that you would expect, but also stuff that Birdie would have been listening to at the time. So there's like some punk songs from when she was hanging out in the last gasp of the punk scene in LA. There's some kind of something from the Paradise Garage playlist, because that's the disco she went to in New York. And there's some hair metal songs that she would have maybe been in like a music video for. Gosh, I wish I could remember. I think I put Cherry Pie on there because, you know, of course you have to have Cherry Pie on there. And then there's some 90s songs. I had this like vision of her listening to You Oughta Know as an adult, and like just not even knowing what to do with her feelings, because Alanis Morissette was so young when that song came out. And I remember like listening to it as an adult for the first time, because like, but I was like pretty young when it came out, and like, I just remember people kind of laughing about it. Like, oh, this girl's so angry, she's talking about going down with somebody in a theater. And like, she was a teenager, and he was a grown man. And I think like just the anger of that song just is kind of incredible now to think about. And so I just like to imagine Birdie listening to that and like really feeling like a kindred spirit. So if you go to my Instagram, the Amy Rossi writer, the CoverGirl playlist is there.
We have time for one more if anyone else has a question.
I have one more. What designer from the 70s do you think most accurately represents Birdie's aesthetic?
I think it would have to be Halston. Just the shirt dresses and the halter dresses, and just the kind of way his clothes move. I think he would just, his use of color and like easy to wear type things, I think that would be perfect.
Yeah, even though like the clothes that were made for her by her designer friend were all very like geometric, and like she could injure herself on like the protruding things.
I had a lot of fun like making
You had a lot of fun with that. It was really awesome. Yeah, it's really great.
But I think it would have to be Halston.